Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are thrilled to have you here and welcome you to the Tamer Center for Social Enterprises Social Impact webinar series. For the MBAs in the audience, this session is part of the Phillips Pathway for Inclusive Leadership program for MBA students, which focuses on leadership and managing diversity, equity, and inclusion across industries. So for the Columbia MBA students in the audience, you should virtually check in using the link that will be shared in the chat box below. We'll throw that out to you very shortly. Tonight, we're excited to host a panel discussion on neurodiversity and how businesses can create growth opportunities for a wide range of neurodiverse individuals as they bring different voices and different perspectives to the table. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce our panelists tonight. We have Jeff Miller, who is the founder and CEO of Potentia Workforce. We have Shawn Fry, who's the Chief Innovation Officer of Potentia Workforce. And we're also delighted to welcome Deanna Jones, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Baker Hughes. As we begin our discussion tonight, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their backgrounds before we dive into the questions. So I'd like to start by asking Jeff Miller to introduce himself and give us a little bit of background as it relates to the panel tonight. So welcome, Jeff.
Let me unmute myself here. Thank you, Sandy. So my background is really an intersection of the professional and the personal. I began my career and have spent the last couple of decades in human capital. I started out in recruiting, moved into consulting, and then actually back into recruiting, and was running a global staffing company here in Houston a number of years ago. And it was a goal that I'd had for a long time to get to that position. And I had the corner office, and I was blessed and pleased to be in that role. And then the personal intervened. I should say that I'm also a husband and a father. I'm a parent to a wonderful teenager who happens to be autistic. Charlie was diagnosed when he was 6 years old. And when he was 16, I was working in this role. And it became apparent to me that what his mom and I had been doing, and kind of that year-to-year approach of supporting him as an autistic youngster, was going to fall short. When I needed to start thinking about him at 26 or 36, and I really needed to raise my game and start thinking about what adult autism was going to look like. And I had to be honest with myself that I didn't really know. And so I began a research project just as a dad to learn what that was going to look like for Charlie. And that led me to learn a number of things. Number one, just how big the population is when you look at autism, first of all, and then neurodiversity more broadly. It's 20 to 25% of the population. Second, I learned about the challenges that folks face who are neurodiverse. And just as an example, college grads who are on the autism spectrum face an 80% unemployment rate, and that just blew me away as a dad and as a business person. And then third, as I dug into it a little bit deeper, I learned of the incredible benefits that businesses are deriving when they hire and embrace neurodiverse individuals. And so when I put all those things together, I realized that corner office that I was in was not where I was destined to be. And really, it's all about Charlie, my son, who really lit the spark for me to make that shift then and step away from a more traditional role and launch Potentia in 2019. And I'm sure we'll get into more details around what Potentia does and how we work with our wonderful partner Baker Hughes. But that's a little bit of my background.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Shawn, may I ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more?
Sure, Sandy. Thank you. My name's Shawn Fry. I'm 57 years old, and I am autistic. And for the most of my life, I did not know I didn't know I was autistic, but most of the people around me did. Um, I am I'm here to answer questions that people might want to know, but I am pretty much a prototype, very similar to the model of what autism looks like, in that we just think differently. And we think divergently, with the majority of you think convergently, very linearly. We happen to approach problems from a much different perspective. It doesn't mean we're not capable. Like when you talk about 80% unemployment, when the truth is, most of my life, I've never gone on a job interview. Since you have a difficult time socializing and you have a difficult time expressing yourself, I even talked to my mom about it today. The most common thing my teacher would say is, I don't express myself well. It's uncomfortable. But those social limitations do not mean there's cognitive deficits. They call it a learning disability, and in some cases it is. But the people who you can be exposed to in this program specifically, I'm going to speak to that. You are in tune with people who approach things very differently. Given the opportunity, I was put into a hospital situation where they had significant problems. And without any training or understanding, I was able to sort through complex data issues, fix their IT systems, give them a better understanding of not just technical issues, but clinical issues, diagnostic issues. This is part of what neurodivergence is. It's a different train of thought. I went on to become the CIO of 3 different hospital systems. What I grasped from seeing that these problems exist across the spectrum of hospitals, I went on to build a private company that just basically did this data analytics, looking at the way hospitals look at data differently, despite the billions and trillions of dollars spent every year. I was able to find unique ways in which to apply data that not only made hospitals take better care of patients, but make them more profitable simultaneously by thinking outside the box. I know in graduate school, they tell you as an MBA to look at things differently. That's really your job. Neurodivergent individuals bring that out of the box thinking part and parcel with the encounter, and they will challenge you to look at things differently. And many times that fresh perspective is ultimately what creates the biggest difference, and why I thank you guys for coming and wanting to listen as to how we can contribute to you in society.
I'm just going to ask Shawn, how many patents do you have?
I have 4 that people are allowed to have access to and 2 that are classified.
Couldn't leave that out. I know you weren't going to say it, so I needed to.
Yeah.
So thank you, Shawn. Deanna, we would love to hear more about your role at Baker and your thoughts on this topic before we begin the questions.
Yeah, so I'll maybe start actually with talking a little bit about Baker and Baker Hughes and what we do. So we're an energy technology company that is working in over 150 countries around the world. We have a range of technologies, products and services that we deliver to customers in the energy space. And so naturally, we have a very diverse workforce from a multicultural standpoint. And, we're just really excited to continue to think about, how we bring different talents into the organization. The challenges we face in the energy space today are super complex, very important to the way that we function on the planet. And so we just really need the best and brightest minds across the widest span that we possibly can. So I think having that context. Personally, I am the CHRO at Baker Hughes. I've been with Baker Hughes just over a year now. So I started just about 8 weeks pre-pandemic. And so it's been an interesting journey getting to use all of the tools that we have today that allow us to do these things in a virtual environment. The change that we've seen has been pretty dramatic. I have over 25 years in the energy industry, a variety of roles. I started in finance and accounting and then moved over into human resources. I also had the opportunity to lead an operational unit for one of the companies that I worked with, specifically actually in the software data management and IT field. And, Shawn mentioned that a lot of people, I would say, of our generation really didn't have the opportunity probably to be identified as neurodiverse. And I know for a fact, just knowing what I know today about neurodiversity, that I've had the opportunity to work with a number of individuals who now know that they are neurodiverse and have had, like Shawn, very successful careers in their industries. And I would say that it was really leaders that took a personal interest in these talents and just really seeing that they had something very different to bring to the conversation, to the problems, to the challenges that the companies that they were in faced. And, really took the time to learn how they could meet them where they were and what they needed in terms of how they could, bring out their fullest potential. And I think that's really, part of the journey that we're on from a Baker standpoint with Potentia, is really to help our leaders understand how we adapt the work that we do, how we do a better job of really identifying, interviewing, and then developing these neurodiverse talents. Because, as Shawn mentioned, they just have this ability to see the world from a completely different perspective. And given the complexity of work that we do, they're just an incredible fit for us as a company. Oh, and maybe I'll mention as well, because Jeff did, I'm a mother. And so obviously I work with a lot of leaders and people who are parents. And, I know a lot of people personally, all of us, there's something special about every child, right? And so as parents, I think we naturally want to be able to see the most come out of every child that is working and moving into the work environment. So yeah, I have 2 children, biological children, and I have 4 stepchildren, so 6 kids. So lots of opportunity to help with that movement and that motion. So
Great, thank you, Deanna. So I'd like to dive in and just talk about how Baker and Potentia Workforce are working together and what that looks like. Because I think that we've established kind of who we are and our backgrounds, and now I'd like to hear how these 2 companies have worked together to come up with this program and the success it's achieved. In fact, Jeff, I'd love to hear more about the expansion that you just found out about today. So that's great.
Sure. I think the work that we're doing with Baker in some ways is typical of work that we've done with other companies. In other ways, I think, and it's reflective of Baker and the innovation that Baker is about. We're really taking it to a next level, which we're incredibly excited about. So what typically happens, and what happened with Baker initially, was a good customer for us is a customer that is already doing some things around diversity and inclusion. Maybe they haven't done as much around neurodiversity, but it's a next logical step for them. That's often married with the idea that they've got a business problem that they need to solve. And in the case of Baker, it was managers coming to us and talent acquisition actually coming to us and saying, we've got roles that we either are having trouble filling or having trouble keeping filled just because of the shortage of talent that's out there that every company faces. Baker's a wonderful employer and an employer of choice for a lot of people, but every employer faces this. So we began pilots with them, not surprisingly in IT, because that's where a lot of the demand is. And had very successful pilots with Baker in that space, and then expanded in a somewhat traditional way, where we started looking at other skill sets outside of IT, which is great for us because in our experience, we see just as many or more non-STEM candidates than STEM candidates in neurodiverse in our database, despite what some people may have heard. And then we've been expanding geographically as well. In fact, we're launching with Baker in the United Kingdom coming up in the next couple of weeks, which we're incredibly excited about. The area where I think we're looking at and exploring where to even take it to the next level, and this really speaks to Baker and their innovative spirit, is how do we create an ecosystem that supports those current neurodiverse employees that may not disclose today? And how do we create an environment where we have resources where they can tap into those resources and they can they can leverage those and decide for themselves whether they want to disclose or not. But either way, being in a supportive environment that allows them to fully engage with the work that they're doing and the employer that they work for. And also, how can we leverage the types of innovative thinking that Shawn has really pioneered, frankly, in running multiple successful businesses around this idea of neurodiverse thought, and how can we leverage that neurodiverse thought amongst the leaders at Baker Hughes so that they can tap into that and not only benefit from neurodiverse employees, but benefit from that neurodiverse thought. So it's a really exciting place we're in right now, and it's growing and expanding in a number of different areas. Really, all to the credit of our partner Baker.
Jeff, can I just go back? You mentioned a pilot, and then you mentioned identifying the needs at Baker and how you can. What are those next steps, right? They've identified the need on the company side. You have a database of talent. You've got this great neurodiverse pipeline. What then happens? What's the next step? Because I know Potentia is unique in that their focus isn't on, changing the individual to fit into the company, but rather changing the culture and thought process at the company in order to be more accommodating and understanding of these. Could you just take us through what that looks like?
You bet. And thank you for asking that question, Sandy. Without getting too into the weeds on it, there's Potentia is a majority neurodiverse or neurodistinct organization, right? We've got neurodiverse, neurodistinct individuals throughout our organization, and they tell us this is part of who they are, right? They want to be their best selves, but they're not looking to have someone cure them, right? They are incredibly passionate, talented individuals who may need some supports along the way. But the real key is in creating environments where they can thrive, right? So our program is called STARS for a reason. It's Spectrum Training, Recruitment, and Support. And one of the things that surprises some people when they're new to neurodiversity is that a lot of our training is for the employer. It's training employers how to interview, onboard, and manage individuals who are neurodiverse successfully, and how to help support them so that they can be their best. How do you interview? How do you onboard? And then how do you ultimately career path? Because we're not just interested in making placements. We want our folks to be in careers where they are adding increasing levels of value to Baker and to our other partners as they go. So that's really how the process lays out. It's a little different in every environment. We know that every company is different, and every company has real strengths that lend to this program. And so we want to capitalize on those strengths, but then recommend maybe some tweaks here or there that will allow neurodiverse individuals to thrive. And so that's really what STARS is all about. And it's really, you hit on it, Sandy. It's about just creating an environment where individuals can thrive.
That's great. Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to turn it over and ask Deanna a question. So why neurodiversity? Why is it important at Baker, and why was Baker so interested in embracing this idea of bringing these neurodiverse individuals into the company?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So first of all, we have an incredible commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion across the entirety of Baker. And as we sort of started our journey as an energy technology company, so we came out of a combination of an oil field services company and a piece of a legacy GE business. And so as we really started to form and shape what are the things that we want to be focused on, and who are we, and how do we show up as a company, one of the areas that we spent a lot of time taking a look at was that inclusive area. And so just sort of testing the processes that we have. And when you look at recruiting and training and development, over time, there were a lot of things in there that create biases, and you end up with, very homogeneous groups of people. So I think as the recruiting team really started to look at their practices and say, how do we create job descriptions? How do we have recruiting practices that give us the widest possible range of talent? Our recruiting leader actually came in contact with Potentia. And so, they have this STARS program. There's already some work that's being done there in terms of, how you look at this specifically for neurodiversity, but it has this broader application for the way we look at talent in general. And so then when you say, okay, what are the things that we're working on as Baker? So, we've talked about, we have digital transformation going on across the entire energy industry. So these are really complex problems. There's, the application of technology, but also how we think about change. And when you start to say, well, how you think about change, again, that different perspective has a real application in that area. Then we think about energy transition and the ambitions that companies and countries have to decarbonize the work that they do and achieve net zero. Again, super complex problem, lots of interlocking, interlayer. And we found in that area as well that in some cases, we are using the tools and techniques that we've developed with Potentia and that program, and we've hired neurodiverse individuals without it being specific to this program. But also, as we start to be more vocal about the conversation we're having, we're finding more and more that people are coming forward and saying, I'm neurodiverse. And this is a great program to help me understand, how I can continue to progress my career. So you have more leaders that are saying, I'd like to understand this because I think it helps me as a leader bring a more diverse set of talents to my table, which is beneficial for the organization because we're thinking about problems, across a number of different aspects. And then, we're just creating these really great opportunities, and you're hearing on both sides, right? So you have individuals that are saying, this is a great place for me to work. I really see how to bring my talents to the team. And you have leaders saying, this is creating better teams for me to address the complex problems that we have. So, I think it's just a virtuous cycle that we get into. But I think it really was, a couple of leaders who had a passion around DEI and, sort of saying, hey, this is an area of focus, and we feel like this is a really great partnership for us to think about different talents coming in. And so, as Shawn was talking about, digital technology is a really great entry point. STEM is one area. But when you talk about energy transition, these are people that are looking at, public policy, social conversations, everything we're doing around ESG. So again, just this mix of things where you want people who think differently and who aren't afraid to bring their voice into the room in a way that's meaningful. And so it's just been, like I say, there's elements of it that are very, us, having a structured pilot, and elements that are just sort of now building off of each other. But I think it just comes from wanting the best and broadest talent set that you can possibly have dealing with complex problems.
Thank you, Deanna. I'd like to move on and ask Shawn, after hearing that and about how, wonderfully open-minded Baker Hughes is in understanding the rich, assets that neurodiverse individuals can bring to the table. Can you tell us a little bit about the barriers you encountered, as you began your career, and how a program like Potentia STARS is really completely turning that around and shifting the entire narrative for these individuals, changing the trajectory of their lives, but also for these companies, being able to, access that talent and harness it to their, to the benefit of their ROI.
Sure. I mean, Deanna hit right on the point of, we're talking about bias, right? But I can go through the biases that I faced as a child, not knowing how to interact with other people. And I can't speak for the type of biases that other people face of being a woman or being Black or things like that. But bias in and of itself is a product of groupthink, right? Neurodivergent individuals, we do not have that inherent bias that other people do. Our willingness to challenge the way things are done brings that level of diversity of thought and inclusion automatically into it by breaking boundaries, by challenging what the social norms are. And my greatest bias seemed to come from the fact that I refused to conform to social norms. I would go to work and I would be there on time and I would do my job, but I wouldn't eat lunch with other people. I wouldn't go to happy hours. I wouldn't go to birthday parties. And they see you as antisocial when that's not the case. But I really don't know how to conduct myself in a social environment. I mean, I tell a story. There was over 20 years I did not walk into a bank because I don't know how to fill out a form. I have multiple patents in mathematics. I have solved clinical issues that have confused doctors for years. I can do these complex things, but there are many things in which I may struggle, and it may, with other people face bias, whether it's a speech impediment or the ability to speak under pressure, the ability to challenge, the fear of challenging something. When I ran my company and I started hiring people as I moved away from the hospital, because a neurotypical or traditional company, part of our anthropological imperative is to create competition and create stress. That is to the benefit of those who are in charge. To those who are subordinate, it creates anxiety, which becomes a liability to those, to their cognitive process, to their efficacy as a worker. When I built my company, when I chose people who I wanted to build around the company in my image. My original intention was to find people who are going to accommodate me. Like I never yell. There's no point to it. Being angry, I do face anxiety like everybody else. But when I selected the people, I didn't necessarily always select people who are neurodiverse, who are autistic, but many people can be neurodivergent. People with PTSD, for example. There are many products of society, women in particular, who've had difficult childhoods, who've had difficult marriages, who've had tragic events, and it helps shapes their cognitive ability. PTSD creates things like hypervigilance. Hypervigilance can be a weakness and it can be a limitation. But given the right work environment, which is part of what neurodivergent training is, and giving those people the opportunity to suggest what they see, to complain, to turn a complaint into a brainstorming session. Some of the most brilliant ideas I ever came up with when it came to clinical protocols were not from doctors with PhDs or MDs. They were from people who observe patterns of behavior day in and day out. People don't ever give nurses credit for how many lives they save because the doctor gets the credit for it. But the fact of the matter is, these people paying attention who are hypervigilant to the care and level of your child, of your mother or father, had great intrinsic information, tacit information that once it was unleashed, radically changed the course of care. And we're not talking about the tune of $1 million. We're talking tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of impact simply by allowing that person to have a voice in a chair and being patient enough to hear what they had to say. And if they don't know how to say it that day, give them a little bit of time, because even when I got my patents, when I submitted the work, there was no solution. I came up with one. And when I submitted the work, there was nobody in the patent office who could understand the mathematics I had put together, but it worked. So they sent it out to Stanford, to the Palo Alto Research Center, who was able to put together the mathematical structures we had. And thus the patents were created, and we went on to solve a lot of big problems for NASA, for Texas Instruments, for Nortel, things like that. I have no classic mathematical training. I wish I went to Columbia. I wouldn't have known how to fill out the form to get in, nor would I have been accepted. But that's the difference between neurodiversity. I mean, it doesn't necessarily come in a package that you would expect it to come in. We're regular people who want to do a good job, who are going to be persistent, work through problems beyond. We do what's called perseverate. Perseverate is incredible focus. You'll know a lot of Aspies, people with Asperger's syndrome. They've built big companies like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Albert Einstein, Elon Musk. These were people who had Elon Musk walked in the room one day and said, I'm going to put somebody on Mars privately. He's well on his way to doing that. I mean, nobody's stopping him. Why? Because he's challenging the way we think about things. Waiting for a bureaucrat to figure out a way to charter a path to Mars is never going to happen. It takes somebody who thinks outside the box and marshals the resources and finds the people who can make a plan. And that's something where I'm grateful for everyone that gives a person the opportunity to speak up from a neurodivergent perspective. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Shawn.
Sure.
I wanted to ask Jeff about, you mentioned about having a majority neurodiverse team, and what types of practices have you employed in order for all of those voices to be heard? How have you changed as a leader in terms of making sure that Shawn, who is on your team and neurodiverse, and other members of your team are set up for success and not in the situation where they don't want to bring their voice to the table, or challenge an idea that you have, or I like when we spoke before how you talk about how you don't tell them how to do something. You say, okay, here's where we need to be. Give me how let me know how you're going to do it. So if you could speak a little bit about that.
Sure. And what Shawn was talking about, and we teach this. We talk about inclusive leadership, and a real tenet of that is psychological safety. And psychological safety basically just says that you're free to make mistakes, and you're free to challenge authority, and that's okay. And in fact, that's encouraged, because when you hire smart people, especially smart people who think differently, you would be foolish to ignore that, right? So I think underpinning all of this is that idea of inclusive leadership and psychological safety. But I'll give you three best practices that have worked for us. Number one is ask the person, right? Because as neurodiversity takes hold, there's a tendency to think that every neurodiverse individual is the same, and that is totally false, right? There's a tendency to think that folks are skill sets and not think about the whole person. And we're talking about millions and millions of people. So I'm delighted with the fact that the neurodiversity movement has gained some purchase. But the next step for us is to really move beyond this kind of two-dimensional view. And so I always say, number one, ask the person. Don't assume that because someone is neurodiverse or not. Get rid of the label. We practice person-centered leadership at Potentia. It's about the individual and how to help them to really do their best. Number two, and Sandy, you talked about this. Define the what and define the why, but don't define the how. Right. So if I'm defining the how, then I am limiting our ability to succeed based on my intellect, and that's a scary proposition. Ask the people who work for me. So I hire people who are much smarter than I am, and if we come together and talk about what we want to achieve and why we want to achieve it, the how needs to be given wide berth so that individuals can come with different ways of getting there. And then the third thing I would say is keep the main thing the main thing. So the fact that Shawn doesn't want to go to a holiday party is not relevant. It's not something that we should spend a second on, right? Shawn is brilliant. Shawn has built 3 companies. He's been a CIO of multiple hospitals. If I'm going to get hung up on the fact that he is not wanting to go to this holiday party, shame on me, right? Keep the main thing the main thing. Let people do what they do best. Let them navigate the how. And when in doubt, ask the person and don't assume. And I think if you do those 3 things, you're on the right track.
I think Jeff made a key point. I don't mind when people ask me questions about it, right? I don't mind answering questions about how I am processing things, or why that noise is distracting me. or things like that. We're not, I mean, not everyone is the same, but if you're unsure, I'll be happy to answer anybody's questions who wants to ask them about what it's like to engage or what's appropriate to ask. I don't care if you call me a person with autism or an autistic person. Those things don't bother me. They bother moms a lot of times, but for me, as long as you address me in a respectful way, I'm happy to talk to you or answer your question. So
That's
anyway, I just thought I'd weigh in on that.
yeah,
A lot
no,
of people are afraid. We're not, we may not understand if you use sarcasm, but we do understand. I am constantly tripped up by sarcasm. It's just part of the process, but it's funny. If I miss the joke, I laugh. It's funny. It's okay. You're not embarrassing me. So anyway, go ahead.
thank you, Shawn. Deanna, you mentioned earlier that it's working with Potentia has helped not only the neurodiverse individuals, but the leaders in as a whole, and also encourage people to feel safe enough to disclose that they are neurodiverse. Can you just touch upon that and how that what that looks like?
Yeah, and I think I wrote down actually, because I thought it was really great the way Jeff describes this person-centered leadership. And I think that's the biggest aha for our leaders when they go through the training, is really just that everyone actually benefits from being considered a person and not a skill or a subset of skills, and that there isn't really a generic approach to leadership. Right? Leadership is about taking the time to really know and understand your team and how you bring out the best in each and every person on your team. And so that's why I think it creates this safe environment where people recognize that shift in their leader, when it's like, oh, you care about me as a person and you want me to be successful, not only in the work I'm doing, but in continuing to develop myself and challenge myself. When you get to that point as a leader, then that it creates that psychological safety that Jeff was talking about. I can say things that I need to say. I can challenge authority. I can bring my ideas to the table and not fear that it's not okay. And so then you say, well, then it makes me feel comfortable to bring my whole self to work. So I can talk about the fact that I'm neurodiverse. And in fact, what I would say is some of the teams we have, people have been disclosing other things about themselves that you're like, oh, okay, well, that's great. And so again, that empowers the whole team because we feel connected. We all, again, going back to, we all have something special or unique about us. And I think that that's the way, to see it, is it's not an impediment. It's something that makes us special and unique and allows us to bring something different. It's different talents that actually solve these complex problems. Like Jeff said, I mean, I work with teams every day that I know are way smarter than I am. And, one of the first leaders that I worked with said, you always want to surround yourself as a leader with really smart people, because that's your job as a leader, is to bring smart people to the table and let them do their thing. And so empowering them and realizing, oh, I don't have to be the smartest person in the room, and I shouldn't be the smartest person in the room if we're going to solve all of these complex problems. I think, again, that just blossoms when we talk about having a culture of inclusivity. It's really when people feel safe to bring their whole self to work, and that they feel that they'll be seen for who they are and developed for who they are, and given the opportunities based on how they show up and what they can do, not based on whether they know someone or they're playing politics or any of the other things that I think are oftentimes frustrating about organizations and the way they operate. So it's just, the training that everyone goes through, I think as a leader, you just realize the value that it has to everyone, whether they're neurodiverse or not. And then it just creates the safety for people to be open.
That's great. And that's a perfect segue into, before I turn it over to asking the audience for their questions, I wanted to ask Shawn, can you tell us a little bit about the environment that you created at Prevalent? It sounds like it mirrors this safe, psychologically safe environment that Deanna talked about, and how it just empowers everyone to be who they are, and have their best selves shine. How much when you were selling your company to private equity,
Mm.
what was the turnover rate? Like how many employees left
It
to
was,
else?
by implementing a big part of what Potentia does and what we're working with Baker Hughes on. As I ran my company for 15 years, where we started with no seed capital, just some neurodivergent thoughts and a plan about revolutionizing how healthcare data was analyzed. And my company went on for 15 years, and we were quite successful. And we had clients with some of the biggest hospital systems, not just in the U.S. but around the world. And what I had not known, and again, as a businessman, I'm a businessman who doesn't like to have meetings, and who has no time orientation and things like that. We're very different from other companies, but the work product still was the yield. After implementing those policies, and I knew other people felt similarly. What I didn't know is, we was going through the 6 months of due diligence before private equity bought my company, they came and asked me, hey, okay, this is great. Hey, where are your turnover files? How many employees do you have? I said, well, currently about 150. Well, where are all the people that quit? No, nobody ever quit. I hadn't realized it was a thing. Then I got working for Potential Workforce, and I realized employees turn over all the time. If you build a psychologically safe place, I mean, sure, we paid competitive rates, but the odds of no one wanting to quit, the people that work through, and people didn't take sick days either. They felt safe. They wanted to go to work. But if you had a problem, you had a person to come to and say, hey, I'm having a bad day, or my kid's having a bad day. We always were able to pick up that slack for each other, and it built incredible level of unity. And we were, as far as a company we talk about, we were predominantly people of color, predominantly women. I hired a female CEO just to be able to show people that it wasn't even intentional. I didn't have a political bias, it just worked. But if we want to be a diverse and inclusive organization, we need to create an environment that works for diverse and inclusive, that's diverse and inclusive of other people. Thought, culture, different neurotypes, all of these elements are what the recipe of success are. So anyway, it does work. For 15 years, we were proof positive that it is worth to make an investment in bringing these policies into the workforce.
That's wonderful.
Sadie, I just want to add on to that, and Potentia applies the same methodology, and it's that lack of turnover doesn't mean that this wasn't an incredibly, and that Potentia's not a very high performing organization, right? I mean, the results were and are exceptional. It's just that people felt and those reinforced each other, right? I think some people hear that and they think, okay, well, we just, it was like a country club or something. Couldn't be farther from the truth, right? I mean, the goals were aggressive, and and Shawn drove it, and Shawn and I drive it now with Potentia, and we've got big things that we want to do. We want to move the needle on this unemployment rate for millions of people. We've got big goals. But we can do it in a way that embraces diversity, and in fact that those are not only, they're not contradictory philosophies, they're actually reinforcing philosophies.
Great, thank you.
A critical element: hiring neurodivergent people is not a charity case. We are a bottom line, for-profit, disruptive, positive force. And a lot of people think it's otherwise when I talk about my work with different foundations and raising awareness on neurodiversity. It's not because, don't get me wrong, there are always going to be people who need assistance, but there is a tremendous potential, that's the name Potentia, in what we are capable of doing. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. We're running out of time, and I see a couple of questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask Casey Buckley, who is an MBA student here on the stage with us, to field those questions and throw them out to our panel.
Thanks so much, Sandy. Hi, everybody. I recognize some of the names in the participants list. But Casey Buckley, third year with the dual degree program between CBS and SEPA, and currently leading a small business consulting program project with Potentia. So really excited to see the turnout this evening, and feel free to reach out if you want to learn more about what my team and I are working on this semester. The first question we have from Kenneth. So first of all, Kenneth thanked everybody on the panel. So he had a question for Shawn. So Shawn, he'd love to hear more about what advantages and disadvantages communicating over Zoom has for people with autism compared to in-person communication.
That's a good question. Well, it's not really a joke. Like when the world went on lockdown about a year ago and people started social distancing, and I was like, okay, I was already doing that. I have two children who are also on the spectrum, and my youngest daughter's still at home, and we're like, okay, this is good. Zoom is a little bit of a challenge in that I'm not good at eye contact, as you could probably tell. I'm not sure where to look, where the appropriate place is. So and it's even harder when I'm supposed to look at a camera when I've got three screens and I'm not sure where to look. That part's a challenge, but it is wonderful. It's actually made me more social because I don't have to focus all of my energy on getting to a meeting. I hate to drive. I have no time direction orientation or directions. I get lost everywhere I go, still to this day. Zoom actually concentrates everything. So I'm more focused, more productive, and I'm very grateful for Zoom.
Thank you. And then second question, so I see from SC, how do we show quantifiable results to bring on board mainstream companies to get them to invest in neurodiverse employees? This seems like, Jeff, potentially a great question for you, as well as some of the overall ROI model that we're currently working on with the small business consulting program. But Deanna, I think this could also be a follow-on answer from you, just to hear a little more about Baker's thought process. Tactically, what does that look like, and what are some of the steps that were taken? So I'm not sure if either of you have a view on who would like to answer first, but certainly a lot there.
Sure, I'll take it first and then hand it over to Deanna. And Casey, you're right. You could answer this question as well. I think the benefits are profound, right? And when we started, we were really focused on that access to talent, right? So if there's an 80% unemployment rate for college grads who are autistic, right, then that's a huge population that companies are just missing, right? And so access to that talent is number one. Number two, it's what that talent brings when that talent comes to work for you. So what we're talking about here, we don't want to generalize, every individual who's neurodiverse is different, but the data shows that across, wide swaths of people, you see very high productivity, very low turnover, and very high new skill acquisition. Right. So you put those three things together and it's like, what you're talking about basically an ideal employee in a lot of ways, although they may need some supports or accommodations in some areas. But again, keep the main thing the main thing. If you can get low turnover, high productivity, high skill acquisition, what else do you want? Right. And then the third thing, and this really surprised me, the level to which this, I knew that it existed, but it surprised me the level to which this is true, is that everything that we implement so that neurodiverse individuals can gain purchase with these employers, wonderful employers like Baker and others, accrues benefits to the entire population, right? So the things that work when you're creating let's say a mentor program, which is really helpful for our neurodiverse individuals when they're starting a new environment. And they don't just have a manager, but they have a mentor who knows their job and can help them understand, really what's expected. Those mentor programs work great for everybody, They work great for neurotypical people who are coming on board, right? If you have a really good onboarding program, right, and you really lay out the expectations clearly, because you need to do that for your neuro distinct individuals, that's going to work great for everybody. More to the point, not just on an individual level, but on a team level and on an organizational level, right? So the teams become more cohesive because they're communicating more honestly about where they are, what their challenges are as individuals, and how they can work better together. And as organizations, that the leaders become better communicators, and overall employee engagement tends to increase, because these are just very popular programs. People want to work for companies that support diversity. So people who may not be anywhere near a pilot that we're running hear about it and feel better about the employer that they're working for. So the benefits are substantial and more wide ranging than even I thought when I started Potentia.
I would probably just add, to Jeff's point about, the performance of the teams, right? And the way that we've been sort of, looking at or monitoring the work that we've done in our pilots. It's like you're focused on the task, it gets done well, high productivity, low turnover. People are happy, they're engaged. All of that are things that we measure naturally. But the other thing that I would probably add from a measurement standpoint is one of the things that we measure is our inclusion factor. So, and to Jeff's and both Shawn's point, where it's like, if you do a good job here, then it just pays dividends across the entirety of your organization, because it goes back to leaders are paying more attention to how they bring out the highest potential in everybody on the team. And so you want to work in an environment where you feel like the company is vested in you and your development, and that you can perform at a high level, and that's seen. And so that would be the other thing that I would say that we're going to watch and monitor, is for teams that actually are piloting here, are they scoring higher on that inclusion survey than other teams that have not participated in the pilot? We'll be able to see some of that.
Awesome, thank you. So we're coming up on time shortly, but we have a couple of questions that seem to be addressing the same area of concern. So they're both about smaller companies, and there are noted benefits of smaller companies in that they're able to more easily offer individualized work environments. But there may be some difficulty for those smaller companies in sourcing neurodiverse talent. So I see two questions here asking about, in one case, Marcia is an HR director at a small but growing tech company. And then we have Kathy asking more generally just about small businesses. But Jeff, maybe this might be great to hear from you in terms of the difference between STARS versus some of the other offerings at Potentia. And then similarly, for a follow-on answer, Shawn, maybe would love to hear what your talent sourcing looks like throughout your experience in business, and just understanding how you build that inclusive talent pipeline.
Sure. So I'll start. So we have a couple of different offerings. At the beginning of 20, way back when, it's hard to think back to those days, but when we were at 3.5% unemployment, and I was looking at the STARS program as a workforce program, and I thought, well, we're not going to be at 3.5% unemployment forever. So let's think about what we need to do. And I also had the benefit of a brilliant partner in Shawn, who run projects for decades. And I thought, we need to create another option who want to access neurodiversity, but maybe don't have the ability to hire a bunch of people. Now, our pilot programs tend to be 3 to 6 people, so they're not big numbers. But for a company that's got 20 employees, that might be a bridge too far. But what we do is we offer the ability to outsource projects, leveraging that neurodiverse talent run by Shawn. So it's that same ability to be innovative, to think of things differently, to approach creative solutions, and to get exposure to not only neurodiverse individuals, but neurodiverse thought, but to do it in a way where as a smaller company, maybe you've got a project that you need to get done and you want to see if it can be done. Again, our job is to deliver just as well, if not better than anybody else, but to bring that level of creativity to it. So our STARS program can work for big or small companies, but we've seen that STARS tends to work or tends to hew a little bit more towards some of the bigger companies like a Baker. And the projects piece tends to hew, although they can work either way, so towards some of those smaller companies that maybe don't have the ability to hire a handful of people, but they want to experience that idea of neurodiverse thought and get real ROI from it. And so that's another way that we do that. And Shawn runs that program for us, that projects program for us exceptionally well.
Great. Shawn, do you want to comment? And
a good way of looking at it is neurodivergent individuals have a tendency to be polymaths. They have multiple skills, multiple dimensions, and they're very quick learners. So if you're a process-oriented business or a tech-oriented business, it's probably worth it to hire a neurodivergent individual. And the best way to test that would be through a project. Let us come in, look at a project you have. I advise everyone, give us the hardest thing. What's the most bang for your buck? Give me your hardest problem to solve and watch what happens. And it's a great way of trial by fire and see what we can come up with. We can't come up with a project plan and a project roadmap that exceeds your expectations, but it would give you an idea of what neurodivergence is capable of.
thank you so much. I'm really looking at the clock, so I'm gonna speed up this last bit. We have one final question, and actually before I go on, if anyone else has specific questions for Jeff about the talent pipeline and recruiting, please reach out to him directly. If you go to potentialworkforce.com, he'll be able to answer you directly because we are running out of time. But the final question, if you can each give us one sentence on what this audience can do to continue this important work and to be more inclusive in the neurodiverse community. Jeff, I'll start with you.
Sure. One of the buzzwords that's coming up these days is intersectionality, and I would just say that it's worth noting that neurodiversity does not distinguish by gender, race, origin, right? So if you're going to embrace diversity, equity, inclusion, you really need to include neurodiversity in that if you want to do it effectively.
Great. Shawn, you want to go next?
Well, I mean, just as a commentary on what Jeff said, the population of neurodiverse individuals has probably your most, there's always some other facet about them. There are a tremendous number who are gender dysphoric, non-binary, LGBTQ. It just comes with it. And the other thing about it is that I want to state for those who wanted to study things, the vast majority of people who've been diagnosed with autism are male. 4-to-1 is the current ratio. Part of my research is about finding out better diagnostic criteria for women and better diagnostic criteria for people who come from alternative cultures, simply because all the observational criteria about people with autism has come from neurotypicals who studied pretty much white males. So we collectively as a group are a very divergent group, divergent number of people, and we do bring a lot of just something that should be known. I'd like to bring awareness to. So I'm not sure if that helps answer your question, but
yes, no, absolutely. I think that's really helpful.
It is important to know.
It is important to know and for this audience to take away. Deanna, I'll let you take the final piece of this.
Yeah, I think for me, the thing that I would encourage is to be open and curious about just the idea that people are different and that we should be considering talent from a unique perspective. I think there's been a lot of work done to sort of like say there's types or this or that, or put people into various boxes of all different sorts. And really, I think as leaders of the future, it really is how do I get to know the people on my team or on teams that I work with in such a way that I can leverage their skills uniquely and I can let them bring their best selves into whatever situation that we're in. I think that's a big part of leadership in the future is that person-centered leadership. I really like that, Jeff. I'm gonna use that one a lot.
Feel free.
Great. Well, we are right on time, 1 minute over, but I want to thank you, Deanna, and thank you, Jeff and Shawn, for joining us tonight. And we learned so much about neurodiverse talent and some things to consider for our business leaders when they're thinking about building diverse talent at their companies. So thank you again to our audience members for tonight, and we hope to see you again at a future Tamer Center Social Impact webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.